Bang! The gavel slammed, and every whisper in the courtroom died. Judge Thompson's voice, deep and unforgiving, followed instantly. "Mr. Dalton, you may proceed." Eric rose slowly, savoring the spotlight like it was his birthright. His lawyer slid a fat folder onto the desk, the sound sharp, rehearsed, calculated. Behind them, a projector lit the wall with images, charts, contracts, photos, all designed to crown Eric as a self-made king. He smiled, believing the world was his. He had no idea the stage was already set for his downfall. Eric clears his throat, his smirk tugging at the corners of his lips. "Your Honor, I am here to claim what is rightfully mine, half of Margaret Hayes's fortune, including the inheritance from her grandmother." The room exhales in shock. Journalists scribble frantically. Spectators shift in their seats. Margaret sits quietly at the other table, her silver hair pulled back with understated elegance, her hands folded in her lap. To the untrained eye, she looks calm, but beneath the stillness lies a storm that Eric cannot see. He leans forward, venom dripping from his every syllable. "Margaret may pretend her success is hers alone, but I was there. Without me, she wouldn't have built anything. Now I demand my share." The courtroom feels heavy, the air thick with arrogance and disbelief. But Margaret doesn't speak. She doesn't even blink, because hidden inside her handbag is a golden envelope that Eric has no idea exists, and that envelope will change everything. Years before this moment, on the day she buried her grandmother, Margaret never imagined her life would circle back to this courtroom. The funeral had been quiet, the church filled with lilies and silence. She had been numb with grief when Eric appeared beside her. He wasn't family, barely an acquaintance, yet he carried himself as though he belonged. His eyes glistened when he leaned close and whispered, "Losing someone who raised you. I know that pain. My childhood was lonely. I grew up with nothing. No warmth, no money, no legacy. Seeing you here, I can feel your strength even in grief." Margaret had been vulnerable then, lonely in ways her children didn't understand. His words had seemed genuine. His presence had felt like a gift. Slowly, she let him weave his charm around her sorrow, convincing herself that companionship had found her when she needed it most. She had spent decades building her architecture firm from the ground up, long nights, endless sacrifices, raising her children with discipline and love while her career consumed every ounce of her youth. When Eric stepped into her life, she believed she'd finally been rewarded with someone who valued her heart more than her wealth. And so she gave. She funded his ventures, indulged his ideas of investment, tolerated his extravagant spending. When her children raised doubts, "Mom, he never contributes. Why do you defend him?" she answered with weary conviction, "You don't understand. You weren't there when I was working through the nights. He's trying. Don't judge him so harshly." But the cracks began to appear. One evening, sifting through the mail, she found a loan notice carrying her signature, except she had never signed it. When she confronted Eric, his expression was not shame, but irritation. "Why are you making this a big deal? You've got more money than you can spend." "I was trying to grow it for us." For the first time, Margaret saw through the charm. Still, she silenced herself, choosing the marriage over her instincts. But something had shifted. Now, in the courtroom, she sits silently as Eric flaunts his delusions. Laura Mitchell, her attorney, hasn't opened her folder. Margaret keeps her hands steady, waiting. Because the moment Eric believes he is untouchable will be the moment she reminds him how fragile his empire truly is. If it were you, sitting in Margaret's seat, what would you do? Stay quiet and wait for the right moment, or confront him on the spot? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Eric thrives on the performance. Every gesture is exaggerated, every pause calculated, every word dripping with entitlement. Richard Cole stands beside him like a conductor, clicking through slides that project glossy images onto the courtroom wall. Vacations in Cabo, gleaming luxury cars, candlelit dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants. To Eric, these are trophies of his so-called contributions. To Margaret, they are reminders of nights spent alone, working late at the office while Eric played the role of a charming socialite. These are the fruits of a shared life, Richard announces confidently, proof that Mr. Dalton invested time, vision, and effort into sustaining this marriage. Margaret remains motionless, her face unreadable. But inside, the truth stirs. She remembers the morning she picked up the local newspaper and nearly dropped her coffee. The headline shouted back at her, "Eric Dalton, co-founder of Hayes Architecture Firm." Her heart had pounded with disbelief. Eric, who had never once worked through a midnight deadline, who had never sacrificed weekends for clients, was now being painted as the visionary behind her life's work. She had confronted him that evening, her voice trembling with hurt. "Eric, this isn't true. You didn't found my firm." He had shrugged, casual as ever. "It's just PR. People love the image of a power couple. Don't be so uptight." Those words had cut deeper than any betrayal of money could. It wasn't just the lie. It was the way he dismissed her sacrifices as trivial, as though decades of blood, sweat, and tears could be reduced to a publicity stunt. Now, in court, Margaret keeps her silence, but her lawyer, Laura Mitchell, finally rises. Her voice is calm, deliberate, every syllable sharp enough to pierce the arrogance filling the room. "Your Honor, may I clarify something? Mr. Dalton claims these assets were shared. Whose name, exactly, was attached to the debts from these purchases?" Eric stiffens. Richard jumps in quickly. "Joint marital funds, of course. They shared everything." Laura's lips curve into the faintest smile as she slides a folder across the table. "Not according to the records. These debts, vacation properties, luxury vehicles, were financed under Ms. Hayes's credit. In fact, Mr. Dalton forged her signature on at least 2 separate occasions. I can read the figures if necessary." The gallery murmurs. Reporters scribble furiously. Eric's face flushes crimson. He slams his hand against the table, his voice cracking with rage. "That's a lie. She knew. She always knew." Margaret finally looks up, meeting his fury with a gaze steady as stone. She doesn't speak. Her silence echoes louder than his outburst. And behind that silence lies memory, like the night after her birthday dinner, when she had gently suggested they take a trip together, somewhere quiet to heal the growing distance. Eric had swirled his wine, sneered across the table, and told her she was useless now, past her prime, that her money was the only thing left of worth. Those words had lodged like knives in her chest, and yet, here she sat, silent, her strength concealed, waiting. Richard, flustered, slams down another folder labeled Asset Division Proposal. Bold numbers glint on the page, half of her inheritance, half of her firm's profits, half of her grandmother's properties. Eric leans toward her, his voice low, venomous. "When this ends, you'll have nothing but your pride, and pride doesn't pay bills." Margaret's hand rests gently on her handbag, her fingertips brushing the golden envelope inside. The envelope he doesn't know exists. The envelope that holds the truth. Judge Thompson clears his throat and calls for a recess. Eric stretches like a man savoring his victory, brushing Margaret's shoulder with smug condescension as he passes. "Enjoy your last few minutes of wealth, darling." Margaret does not rise. She does not flinch. Her stillness is not weakness. It is the calm before a storm. And when the courtroom reconvenes, the storm will bear her name. If you had been in Margaret's place, watching a man you once trusted twist your sacrifices into weapons, would you confront him now, Or would you wait until the moment his arrogance leaves him exposed? Tell us in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. The courtroom buzzes with murmurs as people shuffle out during the recess. Eric strides down the aisle with the swagger of a man convinced victory is already in his pocket. Cameras flash, reporters whisper, and he soaks in every second of attention like it was crafted for him. Margaret remains seated. She does not move, does not speak. Laura Mitchell leans close, her voice low enough for only Margaret to hear. "Are you ready?" Margaret nods, her fingers brushing the golden envelope in her bag. "I've been ready for years." When the judge returns and the gavel falls again, the room grows still. Eric is grinning, leaning back in his chair, already picturing himself sipping champagne once the ruling is made. Richard Cole clears his throat, prepared to press forward. But Laura rises first. "Your Honor, before we allow Mr. Dalton to bury this court in more exaggerations, my client has a document that must be entered into evidence." Judge Thompson gestures for her to proceed. Laura reaches into Margaret's bag, retrieves the golden envelope, and lays it flat on the table with the precision of a queen playing her trump card. She opens it carefully, sliding out several neatly folded pages. The room leans forward in collective breath. "This," Laura announces, "is a prenuptial agreement signed by both parties prior to their marriage. It was drafted, reviewed, and notarized 5 years ago. In it, Mr. Dalton explicitly waived all rights to Ms. Hayes's inheritance, firm, and premarital assets. He also assumed responsibility for any personal debts incurred in his name or through fraudulent use of her credit. Your Honor, the signatures are clear, and we have the notary present in this very courthouse today." Gasps ripple through the gallery. Eric shoots upright, his face twisting with disbelief. "That's not real. I never signed that." Laura lifts a single eyebrow. "You did, Mr. Dalton. On your wedding day, in fact, with a smile on your face. I imagine you were too distracted by the champagne to realize what you were signing." The judge motions for the document. As he examines it, Eric's complexion drains from red to pale. He stammers, searching for ground that no longer exists. I was tricked. She never told me what it meant." Laura's voice cuts clean. "Ignorance does not nullify a contract, Mr. Dalton. You chose not to read. That was your mistake, not hers." The court murmurs with approval. Even the reporters pause, pens hovering as though savoring the poetic justice. Eric grips the table, his knuckles white. "This is a setup. She planned this from the beginning." Margaret finally speaks, her voice calm, steady, carrying years of swallowed silence. "No, Eric. I planned to love you. I planned to share my life with you. But you planned to use me, and that is the difference." Her words hang in the air, sharp and undeniable. The judge clears his throat, calling the courtroom to order. "We will hear from the notary." A woman steps forward, gray-haired, composed. She recalls the day of the signing, confirming both signatures, confirming that Eric had smiled, joked, and waved away her offer to explain the clauses in detail. He said, "Love doesn't need a contract." And then he signed. The laughter that follows is restrained, but the damage is complete. Eric sinks back into his chair, his bravado crumbling in real time. Laura seizes the moment. "Your Honor, my client endured years of financial abuse and public misrepresentation. Mr. Dalton not only contributed nothing to her success, he actively endangered her financial stability with forged documents and fraudulent debts. This prenuptial agreement ensures he has no claim to what he never built, and in fact, places responsibility for those debts squarely on his shoulders." Judge Thompson nods slowly, eyes scanning the signatures again. Eric sputters, turning to Richard with desperation. "Do something, fix this." But even Richard Cole looks rattled, his earlier confidence withering. Eric, the signatures are valid. There's nothing to contest. The courtroom swells with energy, half disbelief, half satisfaction. Eric, panicked, rises suddenly, his voice cracking as he shouts. "This isn't fair! She tricked me! She trapped me!" Judge Thompson's gavel slams down hard. "Sit down, Mr. Dalton, or I'll have you removed from this courtroom." The echo silences him. Eric collapses back into his seat, his breathing shallow, his dreams unraveling before everyone's eyes. Margaret sits tall, her face calm, her voice soft but firm. "You said once that pride doesn't pay bills, but Eric, neither does greed." For the first time, Eric has no reply. The atmosphere shifts, the once smug husband now cornered, the woman he underestimated finally showing her strength. The tide has turned, and the audience knows they are about to witness his downfall. If you were in Margaret's shoes, would you have kept that envelope hidden until this very moment, or revealed it earlier to save yourself the humiliation? Sometimes the sweetest justice comes not from speed, but from patience. What do you think? The gavel's echo still trembles in the air when Judge Thompson leans forward, his glasses sliding down his nose as he peers over the rim at Eric Dalton. The courtroom has shifted. Moments ago, Eric had strutted like a victor. Now he looks more like a boy caught stealing from a cookie jar. His once polished confidence is unraveling thread by thread. Laura Mitchell wastes no time. She steps forward, her heels clicking against the polished floor, her voice carrying with quiet authority. "Your Honor, to summarize, this prenuptial agreement is binding. The notary has confirmed its authenticity, and by Mr. Dalton's own admission in past statements, he signed without review because he believed love made contracts unnecessary. That was his choice. And choices have consequences." She turns to face the gallery, as though speaking not only to the court, but to every woman who has ever been silenced by arrogance. Ms. Hayes built her legacy with decades of sacrifice. Mr. Dalton's only contributions were reckless spending and repeated acts of fraud, for which he alone must bear responsibility. Justice demands that he walk away with nothing more than the debts he created. The words land like thunder. Margaret watches as Eric squirms, his jaw clenching, his fists tightening on the table. His lawyer Richard whispers frantically, but the panic in his eyes betrays him. Eric finally explodes. "This is outrageous! I gave her companionship, I made her look good, He stops mid-sentence, realizing too late that the room is recoiling. His words sound hollow, pitiful. Judge Thompson's voice booms. "Mr. Dalton, silence. This court does not measure companionship in luxury cars and forged signatures. We measure it in truth and law." A ripple of applause breaks out in the gallery before the bailiff quiets the crowd. Margaret feels her heart pound, not with fear but with release. For years she had been silent, defending Eric against whispers, shielding him even when he cut her with words no woman should have to hear. But now, the truth is exposed under the brightest light possible. Laura isn't done. She pulls out a final stack of papers. "Additionally, Your Honor, my client has documented evidence of Mr. Dalton's use of her name for fraudulent loans. These amount to over $87,000 in debt. Under the prenuptial agreement and under the law, that responsibility rests solely with Mr. Dalton." Eric jerks his head toward Richard, his voice a desperate hiss. "Do something. Don't let them do this to me." But Richard shakes his head, defeated. "There's nothing left to fight, Eric. It's over." Margaret inhales deeply, her voice rising with a strength she hasn't shown in years. "You once told me I was useless, that my only value was my money. But Eric, money doesn't define me, and today, it won't save you." Her words strike him harder than any gavel could. Judge Thompson straightens, his tone final. This court rules in favor of Ms. Hayes. Mr. Dalton forfeits all claims to her inheritance, her firm, and her properties. Furthermore, the debts incurred under fraudulent signatures are his to repay. Mr. Dalton leaves this marriage with no assets, and with obligations totaling $87,000. The room erupts. Some gasp, some whisper, some exchange knowing smiles. Reporters scribble furiously, already crafting tomorrow's headlines. Eric slams his fist against the table. "No, you can't do this to me. She tricked me. This is a conspiracy." The bailiff steps forward, his presence imposing. "Sir, sit down, or you'll be escorted out." Eric's bravado crumbles completely. He sinks into his chair, his face pale, his future shattered. Margaret stands slowly, every movement deliberate. She turns to him, her eyes no longer filled with sorrow or disappointment, but with calm certainty. "This villa? These cars? These bank accounts you flaunted? They were never yours. You've been trespassing in a life you didn't earn. And today, it ends." The words hang in the air like a cinematic finale. Eric stares at her, speechless, broken. For a moment, silence fills the courtroom, heavy and absolute. Then Judge Thompson's gavel falls one final time. Court is adjourned. Eric remains slumped in his chair, abandoned even by the lawyer who once promised him victory. Margaret walks past him with quiet dignity, Laura at her side. Each step feels lighter, freer. She does not look back. Outside the courthouse, cameras flash, microphones thrust forward. Reporters clamor for a statement. Margaret pauses, her voice soft yet steady enough to cut through the noise. "Contracts don't kill love. Greed does. Let that be the lesson." The quote spreads like wildfire. Within hours, it will headline every article, and Eric Dalton's name will be forever tied not to power or wealth, but to scandal, betrayal, and downfall. Margaret breathes in the crisp air, the weight of years lifting from her shoulders. For the first time in decades, she feels untethered, free to define her worth, not by what she gave away, but by what she reclaimed. If you were Margaret, would you have walked away in silence or spoken those last words to remind the world what truly destroyed your marriage? Sometimes justice is not only about winning, it's about naming the truth aloud. What would you have done? The courthouse doors close behind Margaret, and the noise of the crowd fades into the hum of city traffic. For the first time in years, she feels the air in her lungs expand without weight pressing down on her chest. The world is still noisy, still messy, but she is no longer suffocating inside it. Eric lingers inside, cornered by reporters hungry for scandal. She doesn't need to hear his words to know what they are: excuses, denials, self-pity. The headlines are already being written. Gold digger husband loses it all in courtroom defeat. Margaret doesn't linger to watch his ruin. His downfall is not her prize, her freedom is. Laura walks beside her, calm and steady, carrying her briefcase like a warrior resting her sword. She smiles gently. "You did beautifully in there." Margaret shakes her head. "I just told the truth. For too long, I let him bury it beneath lies." The two women part ways at the curb, Laura disappearing into a waiting cab, and Margaret is left with the city stretching before her. She doesn't rush home. Instead, she strolls past shops and parks, watching strangers laugh, families gather, children tug at their parents' hands. Life moves on, and she feels herself moving with it instead of against it. That evening, she sits alone at her kitchen table, the house quiet except for the tick of the old grandfather clock. She pours a glass of tea, not wine, savoring the clarity of her solitude. She opens her journal, its pages blank for months, and begins to write. Not about Eric, not about the pain, but about the dreams she once silenced, trips she wanted to take, causes she wanted to support. a garden she wanted to plant. For the first time, the future doesn't frighten her. It beckons. In the weeks that follow, Eric's life collapses in public view. His face appears on news broadcasts, not as the polished man he pretended to be, but as the cautionary tale he has become. The debts crush him. Luxury cars are repossessed, club memberships revoked. Friends vanish like smoke. By the end of the month, he is back in his parents' small home, stripped of the image he worshipped. The city whispers his name not with admiration, but with ridicule. Margaret doesn't revel in his ruin, though others expect her to. She simply lets it be, a natural consequence of choices made in greed. What she does celebrate is her own rebirth. She reclaims her firm with pride, hosting a gathering where she thanks her employees, the people who truly built alongside her. She makes a donation to a local women's shelter, establishing a fund to help women trapped in financial abuse, women whose voices had been silenced as hers once was. The name of the fund carries her grandmother's memory, the woman who taught her that dignity is worth more than gold. Months later, she speaks at a public conference. Standing before a room filled with women her age and younger, she shares her story, not with bitterness, but with clarity. Love doesn't require blindness. Trust doesn't mean surrendering your worth. And contracts don't kill love. Greed does. Respect isn't given by blood or vows. It's earned through honesty and kindness. The room rises to its feet, applause thunderous. Margaret smiles, humbled yet certain. Her voice has become not just her own shield, but a torch for others. At home that night, she sits on her porch, wrapped in a shawl, gazing at the stars. For years, she thought life had ended with betrayal, that the only chapters left were filled with quiet regret. Now she knows the truth. Endings can be beginnings in disguise. She whispers into the night, as if her grandmother might still be listening. I'm free now. And I will live well, not because of what was taken from me, but because of what I refused to surrender, my dignity. The wind stirs gently, carrying her words into the dark. And as the screen fades, the narrator's voice lingers with the moral, the reminder that sits heavy and healing at once. Respect is not inherited. It is not bought. It is not promised. It is earned through love, honesty, and kindness. When greed replaces love, downfall is inevitable. But when dignity leads the way, no betrayal can destroy you. Margaret's story closes not with revenge, but with rebirth, her scars not chains, but reminders of survival. And now, the story turns to you. Have you ever witnessed a betrayal that tried to strip someone of their worth? Have you ever carried sacrifices that others tried to erase? Share your thoughts below. Your story might be the light another woman needs tonight. Here, in this community, no one suffers alone. Every story reminds us that justice is possible, that dignity can be reclaimed, that no sacrifice is ever wasted. So if this story touched you, leave a comment, write a message to your past self, or share the wisdom you would offer a friend in Margaret's place. And don't forget to subscribe to her betrayal stories and ring the bell, so you'll never miss the next tale of sacrifice, betrayal, and the quiet, powerful revenge of justice served. Because here, every story is a reminder. No one can silence your worth.